After Blood Wave, the build that the majority of people were the most excited to play on the Necromancer has to be Blood Spear, which is basically Bone Spear with the addition of Indira's Memory. It turns it into a bone skill, makes it auto-consume corpses, it'll generate additional bone spears from those corpses. We also gain the ability to automatically overpower the moment that a target is inside of a bone prison. We can also heal once the target is overpowered, which means we can offset the life loss from Indira's Memory. All of this was supposed to be really awesome. I mean, like, super awesome. I mean, the triumphant return of Bone Spear. And hilariously enough, it is. This build is going to clear tier 120 this season with everything that I'm about to tell you. Because it wouldn't be a MacroBioBoi video if I hadn't been sitting here for, no joke, 6 hours testing this thing. And it turns out this build is currently working at roughly 25% capacity, where you don't automatically overpower, you don't get the heal, half of your bone spears don't hit anything, half of them don't generate echoes, the echoes that you generate don't automatically overpower. And the worst part about all of this is that walking out of the PTR, we were pretty sure that there were going to be a lot of issues like this, and we're generally just hoping that there wasn't a problem. But no joke, if there's something on this build and it says it does a thing, it probably doesn't. So I'm going to go through the various tests that we've run to show you what I'm talking about, and then we're going to get a better idea of just how much power this build is currently lacking, on top of the fact that it, again, is going to clear a tier 120, no question. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about bug number 1. You don't need corpses to spawn an extra Bone Spear. And what do I mean by that? The pants read as such. Bone Spear is now a blood skill. It drains 10% of your maximum life after hitting an enemy to consume a corpse and then launch a Bone Spear from it. Okay, great. Let's just go ahead and test out that base functionality. Here I have a boss training dummy. I'm going to remove anything else. I have no chance to cast twice. I'm going to cast Bone Spear. And then a second Bone Spear comes shooting out of me. Immediately confused. This was one of the first things that just kind of had me running around with the chicken with my head cut off, just going, what just happened? So for whatever reason, even if you don't have a corpse on the ground, it will automatically summon another Bone Spear. And this is actually stronger than even if you did have corpses on the ground. Now, how could that possibly be? We're going to generate some corpses over here, and I'm going to fire off my Bone Spear, and then the immediate one from the corpse is going to fire into the target. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can kind of see it right here. Now, why is this less powerful than what I just showed you previously? Well, it turns out the majority of the damage from a Bone Spear Necromancer comes strictly from Deathless Visage. No question. This thing bare minimum does anywhere between 35% to 54% more damage than your Bone Spear does. And that's per echo, and it generates 3 echoes. Not only that, when you cast twice, each of your Bone Spears generates, well, kind of generates 3 echoes. That's another one of the bugs that we'll touch on. But when we cast Bone Spear, you have to have it travel a distance for it to summon the 3 echoes. When you cast Bone Spear from a corpse, it doesn't actually travel far enough to generate echoes. I'm now going to fire down. It's going to fire from the corpse to the target. And that one generated a single echo. So you're missing out on 3 of the echoes that it's going to spawn. And sometimes it doesn't even travel far enough to actually even generate an echo in the first place. Did you also notice that there are a few other things missing from the Bone Spear that fires out from the corpse? Typically, a lot of the power from Bone Spear comes from ricocheting the actual shards that fire back out from the Bone Spear into the target. So I'll go ahead and fire it off this way, and you get a bunch of shards. If you've ever seen a really good Bone Spear player, they're always typically at max range so that all of the shards will all hit the target. Well, what happens when I generate a Bone Spear from the corpse? Let's go ahead and take a look. It shot out immediately. I got my shards from my Bone Spear, but it didn't generate any shards. But it is in not generating the echoes when the corpse that is spawned near the target is too close, where you're losing out on the vast majority of the damage. Now, luckily, if there are no corpses, you do generate echoes from the Indira's Bone Spears, and they do actually double up. So you can actually fire out 4 spears from your target simultaneously. And that's super sick, right? Because Bone Dusters is going to make all of our Bone Spears overpower, right? Nope. The Bone Spears generated from Indira's, as well as the Bone Spears from Indira's double cast, when you successfully trigger it from Deathless Visage, just don't overpower. No matter what you do, you just can't make them overpower. Now they can, like, randomly 3% of the time overpower, but when they hit a target in a bone prison, they don't. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I took off Deathless Visage. I'm going to go ahead and spawn a bone prison. I'm going to fire off, and you're going to see the first damage instance was blue damage. That's my overpower. And the second damage instance, which is the second Bone Spear hitting, is white damage, meaning that it doesn't overpower. And again, no matter what you do, you can't make this second Bone Spear overpower. What is the issue with that? Well, the entire point of being a blood skill and building into Overpower is that the echoes from Deathless Visage are supposed to overpower, and these are as well. When you're an Overpower build, when you don't overpower, you just don't do damage. We know this from every single build in the game. Blood Lance, Blood Surge, Soul Rift, Bone Spirit, Sever with Forced Overpower, Blood Wave. If you don't overpower, you quite literally don't do damage. Now, this isn't necessarily super important for people just doing, like Witch Tide or farming down in tier 1 or tier 2. But once you get up into the big leagues and start pushing high tier pit, you really can't afford for half of your damage output to not get the multipliers and the damage bonuses from half of your kit. Now, even that's not the biggest problem, although, technically speaking, half of your Bone Spears just quite literally doing no damage at all and just kind of flittering themselves at enemies, while funny is kind of a big problem. But a lot of the issues with the build comes down to how Deathless Visage is going to interact with this system. Now, we can make the echoes from Deathless Visage proc Overpower, and we can do it consistently. The issue being that they don't work if you don't actually successfully double cast on Bone Spear, and on top of that, all of them don't even double cast in the first place. So let's look at that one, and then we'll look at the Overpower issue. When you have a single Bone Spear, you're going to get up to 3 explosions, and you'll see it goes 1, 2, 3. Pay attention to that, because we're going to trigger a double cast on Bone Spear, and I want you to see how many times it explodes. So there, 1, 2, 3. Interesting. Why wasn't there a second explosion on this first orb right here? It turns out that Deathless Visage, on its double cast, actually doesn't generate as many orbs as your first cast does. So your first one will generate 3 orbs over its distance. Deathless Visage will only start generating orbs on the second orb placement. So the first orb is basically doing half of the damage of the next orb. What this means is that the positioning of the monster becomes incredibly important, because if you're successfully double casting, you'll see that 2 explosions happen here and 1 explosion happens here. What that means is that depending on how close you are to the target, you are literally getting half the damage even though you're summoning twice the Bone Spears. And this problem feeds into how the Overpower structure of this works as well. So let's go ahead and look at that one, and it's going to be a lot. When we cast Bone Prison and then we cast Bone Spear, you'll notice that since we got 2 Bone Spears, we got 2 explosions. And the first one overpowered and the second one didn't, even though both Bone Spears overpowered. If I were to actually run the same test and just get 1 Bone Spear, you'll notice that our first explosion doesn't overpower. So if you don't double cast, the entire first row of echoes that you get aren't going to automatically overpower when a target's in a Bone Prison. You actually have to successfully double cast. Now, the majority of the time, the build's going to run 100% chance to double cast, but it actually goes even further than this to be even buggier than what I just described. Let's look at what happens when I have multiple echoes all hitting the target from the same cast. So here I have my Bone Prison, I get my double cast, and you'll see Overpower, Overpower, non-overpower. So the second spear's worth of explosions are never overpowering in this example. We're actually losing out on half of our overpower damage from there, even though we are getting the echoes to trigger. But when we do a single cast on it, the first one overpowers and the second one doesn't. So the math of how many of your echoes are going to force overpower is this weird calculation of n-1, where n is equal to number of echoes within range of the target plus 1 for successfully double casting. And even when you do manage to get to overpower, your next echo won't if you didn't successfully double cast. So right there, that's just like another half of the damage that we're expecting to get out of this build, just completely erased. And then there's the issue of offsetting the 10% of your maximum life consumed whenever you cast Bone Spear. Supernatural Bone Spear says that when you successfully overpower on a target, you're going to restore 5% of your maximum life from your Bone Spear. 10% of our maximum life lost, ability to double cast here, I should be able to go infinite. I should be able to out heal this by triggering it. And you'll notice that we don't, even though both of our Bone Spears successfully overpower. So it seems like this can only successfully trigger once per actual cast of Bone Spear, even though the verbiage here is Bone Spear projectiles cast twice. And again, since your Indiras can't actually overpower, we can't even test whether or not these would heal you because we can't replicate it. So what it basically means is that to solve the healing of the build, which is what this change to this passive was meant to do in the first place, you have to run something like Doombringer. And Doombringer's fine, the only issue being that you then start losing out on a lot of the damage that typically scales how Deathless Visage's damage will be scaled in the end game. Also means you can't use a two-handed weapon, which would give you the biggest base damage for a Deathless Visage, etc., etc. So while Doombringer is a fine weapon, and again, builds to in tier 120, We have to run these auxiliary options for being able to out-heal the damage to actually gain the benefits of anything here. Why is that such a problem though? Like, yeah, sure, you have to drink some potions and maybe you're not at max life. Why is that an issue? Well, that comes down to how overpower actually works for your character. Healthy status on your character is when you have 80% or more of your maximum life. So if you do the math really quickly, casting 3 of these bad boys is going to drop you down to 70% of your maximum life, so you're going to drop out of healthy. What does that do? Well, it stops Coalesce Blood from working. Hides of Blood, which doubles its damage when you are healthy, that stops working. And Overpower itself and Fortify also drop. Remember that Overpower increases your damage based off of how much of your current life you have over your base life, and then how much Fortify you have. Well, when you lose 10% of your maximum life here, you are losing maximum life, so you get less Overpower, and your Fortify drops immediately as well. Not only that, you lose the fortified status on top of all of this, you also lose the damage reduction from Fortify. That one's less important. But basically, we have to use suboptimal options here and add in a bunch of stats that don't really increase the output of the build, just to minimize how often you are losing the benefits of being a blood skill in the first place. So what all of this means together, again, if you were to just try to crunch the numbers, is that this build is doing anywhere between like 30 to 50% of the amount of damage that it's supposed to be doing. It is not able to maintain its heal output like it's supposed to. All of these things should work like they're written on the tin, but if you've personally been having issues while trying to run the build on suboptimal gear, this is probably why. You're not healing when you're supposed to, you're not overpowering when you're supposed to, your echoes are not overpowering or generating when they're supposed to. The bone spears from Indira's pants fire off into random directions, don't get the full value out of them, don't summon the shards at the end of their terminus, don't automatically overpower, don't generate echoes because the corpses are too close to the target. And even when you don't have corpses on the ground, the spears kind of generate in a very weird and haphazard way, which they're not supposed to, but it just happens. Add on to all of that, the pants do say that it's only supposed to cast the additional bone spear by consuming a corpse and then charge you the 10 maximum life, but it just does it right up front. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything that I just explained to you right here. I'm going to write up in a nice little easy to digest format. I'm going to send it off to the developers because this is like a pretty ridiculous, like overlapping and different system and very convoluted set of like bugs or unintuitive functions or non-functioning parts that is probably just incredibly difficult to try to figure out, especially because it's just like difficult to see it in the real game experience too, because there's so many damage instances going off all the time that quite frankly, half of them I just kept missing and then coming across them later and then trying to figure out what was going on, and then just inevitably started chalking it all up to these various bugs that I've detailed. So the developers will be aware, depending on what that means for them. I'm not exactly sure this will become an immediate high priority, only because this build is doing tier 120. Like, it will get to that point. So it's kind of hard to argue for it needing to get stronger. But the major concern that I have is once these things do get resolved, like let's say they just fixed all the bugs tomorrow, they flip a switch and it just works. This build is going to start doing like pretty ridiculous amounts of damage, which is not a bad thing. That is not a bad thing at all. My major issue is that a lot of people are attempting to evaluate what this build does right now. And quite frankly, it just doesn't make sense to do so, because what's going on under the hood is just not being seen up front. Like, you're just not getting out of it what you need to. So I'd rather us be able to evaluate builds and like make, critiques and give feedback about balancing when they actually work in the way that they say on the tin. So if you're brand new here, if you come across anything different, or if you just found this generally entertaining, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. You'd be surprised how few people actually click that button, even though they tend to watch my videos all the time. So even if you think that you are, go ahead and check. I basically get a comment every single video that's like, hey, I thought I was subscribed, I just wasn't. You just come up in my algorithm. Shoutouts to YouTube Algo, thanks for putting me out there. But the subscriber count going up is a huge way for us to be able to grow the channel. And I'd really like to try to hit 100,000 subs by the end of this year. That's a huge goal of mine. And that's when you start to get that cool little silver plaque, and then I could put it up behind me so that the green screen will just have a floating plaque with my name on it. I think that'd be pretty sick. But thank you very much for watching this video. Leave comments down below. Again, if you come across anything else, any weird bugs, some of the best things that come bubbling up are from my YouTube comments. So don't feel shy. Let's talk down there. Leave a like on the video as well. It helps out a ton. But thank you very much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps us be able to better enjoy Blood Spear, hopefully here in Season 7. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.